Hello everyone, welcome to Creepy Tale Hub, where shadows whisper and true horror finds a voice. Turn down the lights, settle in, and remember, the scariest stories are the ones that really happened. If you like it, please subscribe and also comment the place from where are you watching from.
I stood motionless in the center of my living room, the echo of the slammed front door still vibrating through the apartment's frame. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the force with which I had ended the conversation. Sarah's footsteps had long since faded down the hallway, but her final words still lingered in the air, sharp and smoky like the aftermath of a fire. Around me, everything looked the same. My leather couch still slouched in its usual spot, the coffee table was scattered with psychology journals and unopened mail, and the walls were adorned with my framed diplomas. Yet in that moment, it all felt foreign, like I had stepped into someone else's meticulously staged version of my life. It was as if I were peering through a dirty window, watching myself from the outside. The fight had been about my work again, about the patients, about the way I couldn't seem to leave the clinic behind when I came home. Sarah had said I'd changed, that I wasn't present anymore, that I was obsessed. She said I was starting to talk about my cases in ways that disturbed her, as if the madness I studied was seeping into me. Her voice had risen until it was no longer Sarah's gentle cadence, but something sharp, nearly violent. She accused me of forgetting where the line was between their trauma and mine, between what I carried as a therapist and what I allowed into our lives. I moved toward the kitchen, each step louder than it should have been against the hardwood floor. The refrigerator buzzed in its usual monotone hum. Somewhere deep within the walls, the old pipes groaned like the bones of a tired animal. I reached into the cabinet for a glass and caught my reflection in the window above the sink. Pale, hollow-eyed. I barely recognized myself. I drank, but the water tasted metallic. Off, like I'd been swallowing rust. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten anything substantial. Time had become a blur lately, the days bleeding into each other, indistinct and murky. Sarah had warned me this would happen, that when you immerse yourself too deeply in the minds of others, you begin to lose your grip on your own. I was setting the glass down when I heard it. A scratching. Soft at first, almost gentle. Like nails against wood. It came from somewhere deeper in the apartment. I froze, hand still gripping the rim of the glass, straining my ears. There it was again. More deliberate this time. Rhythmic. Almost musical in its persistence. It triggered something in me, a distant memory I couldn't fully grasp. The sound stopped. Cautiously, I set the glass aside and began walking toward the hallway. The floor was cool beneath my bare feet, and the air seemed to shift as I moved. The hallway stretched before me, longer than it should have been, lined with more doors than I remembered. My two-bedroom apartment didn't have that many rooms. The overhead light flickered, just once. Barely noticeable. But I noticed. And then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, just outside the bathroom door, a figure stood perfectly still. Small, perhaps 3 feet tall, and completely covered in black markings. Scribbles. Like someone had taken a permanent marker to every inch of its body in a blind, frantic rage. Lines overlapped and crisscrossed with chaotic energy. At first, it looked random. But the longer I stared, the more I saw patterns, intentional ones. There was a method to the madness. It had no features, no face, no clothes. Just an abstract human form, covered in writhing black lines that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. I felt as if the breath had been stolen from my chest. And then it moved. Not like a person. Not even like an animal. It skittered. Quick and jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings being yanked by invisible hands. It darted into the bathroom and slammed the door behind it with a sound so loud, so sudden, it echoed like a gunshot in the confined hallway. Then, silence. A deeper silence than before. One that pressed against my ears. My heart was pounding against my ribs with such force that I wondered if it might burst. I realized I had bitten my tongue hard. My mouth tasted like blood. Slowly, step by cautious step, I approached the bathroom. The hallway felt wrong now. Colder, despite the thermostat's steady glow. The air had a weight to it, thick and viscous, like I was moving through water. I found myself holding my breath without meaning to, as if instinct alone was urging me not to make a sound. When I reached the bathroom door, I placed my ear gently against the wood. Nothing. No breathing. No movement. Just a flat, oppressive stillness. I tried the handle. Locked. From the inside. But I hadn't used that lock in years. I knocked once. Lightly. "Hello," I said, the word barely a whisper, and immediately regretted it. The sound felt absurd in the silence. What was I expecting? A voice? An answer? Some part of me, the rational part, was screaming that none of this made sense. That I needed to call someone. Leave. Run. But another part, the one that had lived too long inside the dark corners of other people's minds, knew the truth. Something had entered my apartment. Something that didn't belong. And I had let it in. Here's your story continued and rewritten in a fully expanded, polished narrative style for clarity, psychological depth, and atmospheric horror. This is a seamless continuation from the last section. Whatever that thing had been, it left no logical explanation. I tried the bathroom door handle again, harder this time. It didn't budge. Still locked. That was when I noticed the floor. Small, circular drops dotted the wooden planks. Perfectly round, glistening under the dim hallway light. They were black, not just dark, but the kind of unnatural, absolute black that seemed to absorb the light around it. They stretched in a line, beginning where I'd first seen the figure and leading all the way to the bathroom door. Each drop was spaced precisely, maybe 6 inches apart, as if whatever had moved through here had been dripping. I crouched down and touched one. It was warm, thicker than paint, more viscous than water. Definitely ink. It stained my fingertip with a slick darkness that didn't come off, no matter how hard I rubbed it against my shirt. That was the moment when the logical part of my mind tried to reassert control. Stress-induced hallucinations. Sleep deprivation. A break from reality triggered by the argument with Sarah. I told myself I was manifesting sensory distortions, visual, tactile, and auditory phenomena under the weight of prolonged psychological strain. But the ink was real. The locked door was real. The frigid draft seeping from beneath it was real. And the metallic tang of blood in my mouth from biting my tongue, that was definitely real. I returned to the living room and, almost without thinking, called Sarah. Her phone rang once before cutting directly to voicemail. Her voice, light and automatic, played through the speaker, but it felt hollow, distant. Like hearing someone underwater. I didn't leave a message. What could I even say? That I was seeing things. That something impossible had entered my home and sealed itself behind a locked door. That it bled ink. Instead, I sank into the couch and tried to force some order into the chaos. I'd recently been working with a patient, a young man in his 20s, who had vivid delusions. He believed shadowy figures lurked just outside his peripheral vision, always watching, always just out of reach. He said they followed him home. Left signs. Marks. Messages. I had taught him grounding techniques. Reality testing exercises. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I tried the same techniques on myself. 5 things I could see. The coffee table. My laptop. A half-empty water bottle. A stack of psychology journals. The lamp beside the couch. For things I could hear. The refrigerator humming. The faint sound of traffic outside. My own breathing. The central heating kicking in. 3 things I could feel. The leather of the couch under my thighs. A cold draft from the cracked window. The sticky, unyielding residue of ink on my finger. The techniques helped slightly. My heart rate slowed. The metallic taste in my mouth began to fade. I was on the verge of convincing myself it had all been a stress-induced episode when I heard the click. It was unmistakable, the soft, mechanical click of the bathroom lock disengaging. Then came the slow, creaking whine of the door opening. The hinges sounded strained and dry, like they hadn't moved in years. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then, footsteps. Not the erratic, insectile skitter I'd seen earlier. These were slower. methodical. Each step landed with unnatural deliberation and paused between movements, as if whatever was walking wasn't used to the act. With each step came a faint scraping noise, like nails or claws dragging across the walls. The footsteps stopped, directly outside the living room. I turned my head slowly, dreading what I might see. But the hallway appeared empty. Still, the scraping sound continued, an intermittent scratching against the paint and plaster, until it, too, stopped. Eventually, I stood, moved toward the hall with careful, measured steps. More drops of ink now marked the path, this time leading from the bathroom to the front door. But these weren't the neat, evenly spaced droplets from earlier. They were erratic, smeared, sloppy, as if something had been leaking uncontrollably, or struggling. Then I saw the writing. The drops had formed letters, words, trailing across the wall in jagged, angular lines. They were mostly incomprehensible. Scratches and spirals and looping symbols that might have once been English letters or might have been something else entirely. But one phrase stood out, just above eye level. Near the front door. You're not alone. The ink was still wet. I searched the entire apartment. Every room, every corner, every closet. All the windows were locked from the inside. The front door was still secure, the chain bolt still drawn. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing made sense. Someone or something had been here. Something had written on my wall. I sat back on the couch and did the only thing I could think to do. I called my supervisor at the clinic, Dr. Martinez. It was late, but she answered after a few rings. Her voice was groggy, but there was concern in it. I began explaining everything. The noise, the ink, the figure, the hallucinations, the message. She was quiet for a long time, and then she asked me a question I didn't expect. Have you been taking your medication regularly? I blinked, confused. What medication? I asked. She sighed, low and tired. The antipsychotics I prescribed last month. After your episode at work. I had no memory of any episodes at work. No recollection of being prescribed medication. No vivid moment of sitting across from Dr. Martinez discussing my mental health beyond our usual professional exchanges. I don't understand, I said, my voice thin, fragile. James, Dr. Martinez replied gently, we've talked about this. The stress from your caseload, the way you've started identifying too closely with your patients. You've been having episodes for weeks. Her words floated in the air, but they didn't land. My mind refused to absorb them fully. According to her, I'd been unraveling for over a month. Missing appointments. Arriving at the clinic disheveled and confused. Talking about patients who didn't exist and referencing case files no one could find. After the call ended, I remained seated at my kitchen table, staring at nothing. I tried to sort through the past month to remember clearly. The memories were there, technically, but they felt disconnected. Blurry. Like scenes from a movie I'd seen once years ago. Familiar in tone, but not in truth. Had I really been seeing patients? Had Sarah and I actually argued just a few nights ago, or had I been screaming into the silence of my apartment all along? I looked down at my fingertip, still stained black from the ink I had touched. That was real. I could feel it, the dry, rough patch where the pigment clung to my skin. It had settled deep into the creases, refusing to fade. And yet when I returned to the hallway, where I'd seen writing scrawled across the walls, I found only clean, unmarked paint. No traces of ink. No words etched by human or inhuman hand. Just the white surface and, reflected faintly in the darkened window at the hall's end, a man with hollow eyes and stained fingers. The bathroom door stood wide open. As daylight slowly seeped in through the windows, casting long, bent shadows across the floor, I stayed in the living room, motionless. Watching the hallway. Listening for another scratch. Waiting for something to return. But nothing came. By the time morning had fully broken, I began to understand something chilling. The question wasn't whether what I had experienced was real. The question was whether I still was. The ink stain hadn't faded overnight. If anything, it had deepened. Spread. There were now other marks on my hand, tiny prints, almost like fingerprints, dotting my skin. They weren't mine. I hadn't touched anything. Or, had something touched me? The phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I frowned. I hadn't given her my new number. When I answered, her voice was warped, distant, distorted, like it was coming through an ocean of static. "I've been so worried about you," she said. "You haven't answered your door. You were here last night. We had an argument, James." "No," I murmured. "That was just a few nights ago, wasn't it? I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. Not since the hospital." The word cut through me. Hospital. A memory stirred, vague, shrouded in fluorescent light and antiseptic. A sterile hallway. A locked door. A bed with restraints. A metallic taste rising in my throat. "I need to go," I whispered. "James, don't hang up. Just tell me where you are." But I'd already ended the call. I was already walking to the bathroom mirror. I stared at my reflection, my face unmistakably mine, but marred. Thin, jagged lines traced across my skin, black ink curling around my cheeks and forehead in patterns that hadn't been there the night before. They looked exactly like the markings on the figure in the hallway. Had I done this to myself? Or had something done it while I slept? I raised a trembling hand to my cheek, and in the mirror, my reflection mimicked me. But there was something wrong. Its movement was slightly delayed, as if we were out of sync. Then it raised its finger before I moved mine. I froze. The mirror reflected not just me, but the hallway behind me. It stretched endlessly now, longer than physics should allow, lined with countless doors I'd never seen before. And in the shadows, at the very edge of vision, stood the figure again. Small. Still. Watching me. The mirror cracked. A spiderweb fracture exploded from the point where my reflection's finger touched the glass. But I hadn't moved. I was still. Yet my reflection smiled, my smile, and tears streamed down my real face. The last thing I remember is the sound of breaking glass and the sensation of falling backward into darkness, or maybe into myself. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the couch. The apartment was silent again. Normal, even. Except for the scent of ink that lingered in the air, sharp and unmistakable. On the coffee table sat a photograph I had never seen before, me, standing in a hospital room. I wore a patient's gown, and my entire body was covered in the same black scribbles. In the background stood the small figure. It could have been another patient. Or something else entirely. In the lower corner of the photo, in my own handwriting, was a sentence I couldn't remember writing. "You're not alone." But I didn't remember the hospital. I didn't remember the picture. I didn't remember anything that could explain any of this. Except the ink. That, I remembered. And now, the black lines had spread across my entire hand, curling into delicate, deliberate symbols. Words. Words I was terrified to read. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting their sickly pall across the produce section. I stood beneath them, weighing overpriced apples in my palm, their glossy skins reflecting a distorted version of my own blank expression. That's when the old man appeared. Not approached. Not walked up. He simply materialized, the way people sometimes do when you're too deep in mundane thoughts to notice the world shifting around you until it already has. His presence was immediate. Invasive. He stood so close I could smell him, a sharp medicinal tang of old cologne, tinged with something musty and decaying, like photographs left too long in a flooded basement. His face was pale and lined like crumpled paper, and when he smiled, it revealed teeth the yellowed color of old newspaper. Before I could take a step back, he leaned in too close and exhaled softly against my ear. He spoke. The words weren't in any language I recognized. Not even gibberish, exactly. They were a sequence of soft, urgent sounds that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and land somewhere deeper, just behind my sternum, in that place your body uses to store dread. When I turned to confront him, to ask what he'd said, he was already shuffling away, vanishing among the citrus displays, his hunched form disappearing around the corner toward the deli. I told myself it was nothing. Urban life conditions you to ignore the eccentric, to treat the strange as scenery. Harmless. But the man had left something behind. Not a scent, not a fingerprint. Just a weight. A wrongness that followed me home like a shadow that wasn't mine. 3 days later, the first envelope arrived. I found it wedged tightly between my apartment door and the frame, almost as if it had been placed there from inside. My name was written across its cream-colored surface in elegant, looping script calligraphy from another era. No return address. No postmark. Inside, nestled between layers of delicate tissue paper, was a single photographic negative. I held it up to the desk lamp. It was me, unmistakably me, captured from behind, standing alone in the nave of a towering cathedral. Gothic arches stretched impossibly high above me, and rays of light streamed through stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows across cold stone. But I'd never been there. I've never stepped inside a cathedral like that. Never traveled overseas. I had no memory of that moment, yet there I was, framed perfectly, head tilted up towards something just out of sight. My posture suggested awe, or perhaps fear. The photo was far too crisp, too composed, to be the work of an amateur. It wasn't a tourist's candid shot. This was professional, meticulous lighting, depth, and exposure. Someone had taken their time with this. I spent hours that night scrolling through databases of European cathedrals, architectural archives, travel blogs. None of them matched. And still, I dreamed of vast stone corridors, of footsteps echoing behind me. 4 days later, another envelope arrived. This time, the negative showed me in a Victorian conservatory, surrounded by lush, exotic plants. Iron scrollwork curled overhead like frozen vines, and massive glass panels bathed the room in filtered sunlight. Again, the photo was taken from behind. Again, I was alone. I appeared to be reaching up, toward a hanging vine, perhaps. Or towards something just above the frame. My hand, mid-motion, was suspended in a moment I didn't remember living. I had never seen a place like that. I started checking the hallway more often, listening for footsteps on the stairs, watching for shadows that lingered too long at the edge of the doorframe. The other tenants in the building, students, young professionals, transient and tired, seemed unbothered. When I casually brought up odd mail to Mrs. Chen, the retired woman who lived 2 doors down, she only offered a polite smile and quickly changed the subject to the broken elevator again. Exactly 1 week after the first envelope, the third arrived. This time, the image was taken from a distance, as if with a telephoto lens. I stood on the edge of a cliff, facing the ocean. Waves frothed below, and the wind lifted strands of my hair. My features were clear in profile. The lighting, late afternoon, cast long, sharp shadows. I was wearing my navy coat, the one I bought 2 months ago. The jeans I had on in that image were the same pair I wore to work just days ago. But that made no sense. I live in the Midwest, hundreds of miles from any coastline. I hadn't left the city in over a year. And yet, there I was. Whoever was taking these photos had serious equipment, skill, patience. But when? How? Digital manipulation seemed the only rational explanation. Some sort of elaborate hoax, though I couldn't imagine who would go to such lengths or why. The photos felt too intentional, too intimate. They weren't meant to scare. They were meant to show me something, to prove something. That night, I dreamed I was standing at the cliff's edge, staring into the churning sea. And somewhere behind me, in that dream or in waking, I heard the old man's whisper again. Not words, just sound. Sound that dug into my ribs like a key fitting into a lock. But these weren't digital images. They were film negatives, physical objects that bore the unmistakable texture and smell of old chemical processes. Their edges were serrated, their grain organic. Any attempt to fabricate them with modern tools would require an almost obsessive level of craftsmanship. Someone with access to a darkroom. Someone with time, resources, intent. The implications grew too large to ignore. I began keeping a log, a meticulous, almost religious document of my daily life. Every movement, every errand, every conversation became a data point. I photographed myself leaving the apartment each morning and returning each night. I collected receipts, synced location data from my phone, saved time-stamped texts and emails. I even noted when I took out the trash or checked the mailbox. It wasn't just precaution anymore. It was compulsion. But the data brought no relief. No contradiction. Only silence between the lines. The fourth negative arrived a week later. It showed me standing on the platform of what appeared to be an abandoned subway station. The walls curved overhead in crumbling arches of white tile, stained and yellowed with time. Rust bloomed across iron beams like bloodstains in a hospital corridor. Graffiti in languages I didn't recognize covered every surface, symbols I couldn't place even after hours of searching. This wasn't part of the city's modern transit system. I knew that much. In the photo, I was alone again, framed beneath a broken light fixture, gazing down the tunnel as if waiting for a train that would never come. My posture was alert, expectant. That night, I called my sister in Portland. I tried to keep the tone casual, asking about her work, her kids, before nudging the conversation toward me. Had I mentioned anything unusual recently? Any travel? A sudden interest in photography? Her voice on the other end grew cautious. Concerned. "No," she said. "Nothing like that." "Why? Is everything okay?" I told her it was. I lied. Then I ended the call, but her concern lingered in my chest long after the line disconnected. The fifth envelope changed everything. There was no single negative inside this time. Instead, I unfolded a contact sheet, dozens of small frames arranged in precise rows, printed on matte paper. Each image featured the same subject, me. But this time, the locations were familiar. Me, walking to the coffee shop on the corner. Me, entering the office where I worked. Me, sitting on a bench in the park I passed through most mornings. Me, waiting at the bus stop. Every image time-stamped. Every image dated within the past month. Unlike the others, those surreal glimpses into impossible cathedrals or seaside cliffs, these were real. These were taken here, in this city, on days I remembered. The detail was astonishing. Framing, focus, even the exposure, perfect. These weren't moments I had forgotten. These were moments someone else had taken from me. I studied each tiny frame with a magnifying glass, scanning the background for evidence, anything to help me reconstruct the point of view. The angles varied. Some were taken from across streets, others through windows or behind fences. Whoever had taken them had been close, intimate. In one image, just as I was leaving my apartment, I spotted something. A reflection, faint but unmistakable, in the glass of a storefront window. A blurred outline. A figure. Possibly holding a camera. My stomach turned. The paranoid tension that had been coiling inside me for days finally snapped taut. I started seeing watchers in every reflection, every passing car, every flicker of movement in my periphery. I crossed streets at random. Changed routes. Varied my schedule down to the minute. I stopped answering calls unless I recognized the number. Even then, I hesitated. The rational part of my brain, the one that had survived on logic and order, told me this was textbook psychosis. Hallucinations. Delusions of persecution. I'd read about them. Studied them, even. But the negatives were real. The timestamps were real. The reflection in the window was real. 2 weeks to the day after the first envelope, the sixth negative arrived. It ended whatever illusions I had left. The image showed me standing in my own bedroom. My posture casual, mid-motion, reaching into the dresser, selecting clothes. A ritual I performed every night, usually around 10 o'clock. The photo was sharp, clean. The angle unmistakable, from the window across the room. But that window faced open air. I live on the 4th floor. There's no fire escape. No adjacent buildings tall enough to give that vantage point. Nothing but a narrow alley below and a sheer brick wall across the way. The timestamp on the photo? 10:04 p.m. 4 nights ago. The timestamp indicated this photograph had been taken just 3 days earlier. I spent that night wide awake, compulsively checking every lock on my doors and windows. I pushed furniture in front of the entrance. I jammed a chair beneath the knob like I was trying to hold back a flood. Rational explanations were gone. Even advanced digital manipulation couldn't explain the physical negatives, not just their detail, but the impossible perspectives, the timing, the intimacy. The seventh envelope arrived the next morning. Inside was the most disturbing image yet. It showed me asleep, peacefully, vulnerably, in my own bed. The angle was directly above my face, the focus so tight I could see individual strands of hair on the pillow. The implication was immediate and paralyzing. Someone had been inside my apartment, inside my room, beside my bed, watching me as I slept. I called the police, but explaining the situation to the desk sergeant made everything fall apart. Yes, I had photographs, but anyone could print a digital image onto film. I had no direct threats, no damage to property, no trespass confirmed, just an increasingly unhinged narrative and a stack of chilling but inconclusive evidence. The officer nodded with polite concern, recommended a security system, and advised me to call back if anything more concrete developed. That night I sat in the dark, every light off, peering through a slit in the curtain. I waited. Around midnight, he appeared. The old man from the market, standing perfectly still beneath the street lamp. His face tilted upward toward my window, as if he'd known I'd be watching. He didn't move. Not for nearly an hour. Then, without a sound, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The eighth negative arrived the next day. But this time, I was waiting. I sat beside the door from sunrise, listening for the faintest sound. When I heard the delicate whisper of paper sliding against wood, I tore the door open. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No closing doors. Just the envelope on the floor, still warm to the touch. This image was different. Familiar. It showed me at the market. From the old man's perspective. I was examining apples beneath harsh fluorescent lights, exactly as I remembered. But in the photo, I was looking directly into the camera. My expression frozen in a moment of startled recognition. That couldn't be right. In my memory, the old man had approached from behind, whispered in my ear, and walked away. I had never seen his face. I had never made eye contact. But the photo told a different story. It told me I had seen him, that we had locked eyes. The ninth envelope did not contain a photograph. It held a note, written in the same careful script as the earlier address labels. Development requires patience. The image exists before the photograph. You are learning to see what was always there. Beneath the text was a single word. Soon. I burned the note immediately, but the words stayed lodged in my mind like a splinter I couldn't reach. The image exists before the photograph. What was I learning to see? The 10th envelope arrived exactly 1 month after the encounter in the market. Inside was a single negative. It showed me standing in my apartment, holding that very same negative, examining it, just as I was now. The perspective was utterly impossible. It had been taken from a vantage point inside my body, as if the photographer stood directly behind my eyes, looking over my own shoulder. In the image, I wore an expression of dawning horror, staring at a photograph of myself staring at a photograph, which showed myself staring at a photograph. The recursion was infinite. A loop without beginning or end. A hall of mirrors that devoured causality. I dropped the negative and stumbled to the window. The sun had begun to set. The street outside was bathed in copper light. Between the buildings, in the long shadows, a figure stood watching. It was him. The old man. Silent, unmoving. Our eyes met across the distance. And then, he smiled. He raised something to his face. A glint of metal and glass caught the light. Click. A camera flash burst like lightning, filling my vision with a searing white bloom. When the world returned, I finally understood. The photographs weren't showing places I'd never been. They were revealing places I had always been. Moments that existed outside time, unnoticed until now. The old man's whispered words returned, sharp and clear at last. The photograph sees what the eye cannot remember. I stood frozen at the window. And then, without a sound, the 11th envelope slid under the door. I hadn't heard anyone in the hall. I hadn't moved to intercept it. My hands opened the envelope without conscious direction. Inside was a single negative. It showed me standing at the window, right now, looking down at the street, the precise moment the flash had gone off. But I wasn't alone. Reflected faintly in the window glass, behind me, just over my shoulder, stood a figure holding an antique camera. Finger poised on the shutter. The figure was me. I am still standing at the window. The carpet beneath my shoes squelched with each step, releasing the acrid stench of industrial cleaner, badly masking something older, riper, organic and unpleasant. It clung to the back of my throat like spoiled meat sealed in plastic. The Grand View Hotel, as it called itself with tired irony, hadn't lived up to its name in decades. The grandeur was a lie that even the flickering fluorescent lights couldn't keep up anymore. The sign outside buzzed and stuttered with a few missing letters, casting its dying glow across cracked concrete and overgrown hedges. But it was cheap, and cheap was all I could afford now. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, an oppressive tunnel lined with faded wallpaper that had once been gold but now resembled dried bile. The pattern, once elegant swirls, had decayed into indistinct, sickly stains. Room numbers were crooked, their brass plates tarnished and dulled by years of nicotine and despair. I stopped in front of room 1347, where the 4 in the number tilted at an unsettling angle, like a broken tooth. It made my eye twitch. I swiped the keycard once. Nothing. Again. A third time. The light blinked red. My hands trembled from 6 straight hours of white-knuckle driving through fog-thick mountain roads, the kind where guardrails seemed more like suggestions than safety. Finally, on the 4th attempt, the lock clicked. The door creaked open with the slow reluctance of something disturbed from rest. The room beyond felt smaller than it had looked in the online photos, the kind of cheap wide-angle shots that make closets look like lounges. The air was stale and unmoving, as though it had been sealed in with the last guest and left to ferment. A cocktail of scents hit me at once: old cigarette smoke, faded cologne, sweat, mildew, and something else metallic and sharp, like rusted pennies or dried blood. I dropped my duffel by the door and did a slow rotation to take it all in. A queen bed dominated the room, covered in a burgundy comforter stretched taut over lumpy pillows. The kind of cheap hotel bed that always felt vaguely damp, no matter the season. The wallpaper, that sickly yellowing skin, curled at the corners like peeling scabs. A single narrow window offered a view of the parking lot outside, illuminated by sodium vapor lights that painted everything in a jaundiced, unnatural orange. Beyond that, the forest loomed, too close, a thick black wall of shifting trees that seemed to lean toward the building. I had the distinct, ridiculous feeling that if I stared too long, they might start pressing against the glass. I had come here to meet Marcus, my brother. My only living family. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the incident at Mom's funeral, a day soaked in whiskey and raw nerves when too many unsaid things had finally exploded into sharp words and slamming doors. But then, 2 days ago, Marcus had called me. Out of nowhere. His voice had sounded different, thinner, strained, frantic. He told me he had something important to say, something I needed to hear. Something about our childhood. Something I had forgotten. The desperation in his voice was what pulled me here, not guilt, not forgiveness. It had felt urgent. And real. We were supposed to meet in the morning, at a small diner in town. That gave me just enough time to try and rest, to brace myself for whatever Marcus thought was important enough to break 3 years of silence. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 11:47 p.m. in angry red digits. I stripped down to my boxers and undershirt, hanging my clothes in the narrow closet, which reeked of mothballs, mold, and something dead. The wire hangers clinked together like brittle bones. There was no draft, yet they swayed slightly after I closed the door, making a sound like wind chimes in still air. The bed sheets were cold as I slipped beneath them, damp in a way that made my skin crawl. I stared at the ceiling, trying to ignore the muffled buzz of the hallway lights outside, the occasional creak of old plumbing or distant movement. I counted backwards from 100, like my therapist had taught me during the worst of the divorce. My voice whispered inside my head, steady, methodical. 99, 98, 97. Sleep came like a hammer. Sudden. Heavy. Unyielding. The dream began the way they always did, with a false comfort. A feeling that I was somewhere familiar, that I belonged. I was in our childhood home, the split-level ranch where Marcus and I grew up, where we shared a bedroom until he turned 16 and moved into the basement to brood and smoke and fill notebooks with sketches of eyes that never closed. But this house wasn't right. The floor plan had stretched. The hallways were too long, the corners too sharp. The walls were covered in the same peeling yellow wallpaper from the hotel, only here, it moved subtly, like it was breathing. Family photos lined the corridor, but the faces were blurred out, smeared with oily black swirls where eyes should have been. It was like memory failing to render properly. Footsteps echoed behind me. I knew that rhythm. That heavy, deliberate tread. Marcus. I turned, but it felt like I was underwater. Each motion a Herculean task. When I finally faced him, he was standing at the far end of the hallway, unmoving. His frame was familiar, same lanky teenage body, same old hoodie, but off. Taller than he should have been. Limbs too long. Shoulders too wide. His face was Marcus's, but stretched like someone had tried to paint him from memory and gotten the proportions just wrong. And his eyes, those weren't Marcus's eyes. They were ancient. Predatory. He smiled. His teeth were wrong too many of them, packed behind his lips like rows of shark teeth. "I've been waiting for you," he said. But his lips didn't move. The voice came from everywhere, inside the walls, beneath the floor, behind my eyes. I tried to speak, to ask him what this was, what he wanted, but my tongue felt heavy, pinned to the floor of my mouth. All I could do was stand there, heart thundering, as he began to walk toward me. 1 step. 2. Each footfall echoed impossibly loud. The hallway elongated, stretched like elastic. He remained the same distance away no matter how many steps he took. And then I woke. The sheets were soaked with sweat. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. I lay there, chest rising and falling, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. But the closet door was ajar, and I distinctly remembered closing it. And from somewhere beyond the paper-thin walls of room 1347, I thought I heard the sound of wind chimes. But there was no wind. And the hotel had no chimes. Marcus was wearing his own face. Or something that resembled it. But I knew better now. Whatever stood at the end of the hallway had never truly been my brother, not as I remembered him. It was a shape wearing his skin, a thing that had studied him, mimicked him, practiced his expressions in some impossible mirror. It had always hidden, always pretended that the past was just memory, malleable and benign. But you can't hide from family. It reached toward me, its hand stretching out with impossible grace, fingers elongating beyond any human anatomy, knuckles cracking and bones flexing in ways that made my stomach lurch. They were more like feelers than fingers, seeking rather than grasping. I turned to run, but my legs betrayed me. They were leaden, packed with concrete, each limb an anchor. My feet had rooted into the warped wooden floor of that not quite real hallway. I was paralyzed, not in body alone, but in something deeper, frozen in the mind, as though some part of me had already surrendered to what was coming. The thing's hand made contact. And it wasn't a touch. It was an intrusion. The instant it met my skin, something ignited. Not fire, no, fire would have been a mercy. This was electric, a shockwave rippling through my nervous system that left my thoughts stuttering and my vision flickering. I wanted to scream, but my throat had collapsed around silence. This wasn't a brother's touch. It was surgical, alien, wrong, a violation of the soul as much as the body. It began to spread up my arm, like poison injected straight into my bloodstream. But it wasn't just a feeling. It carried images, memories I could not possibly possess. I saw places I'd never been. Faces I couldn't name. A basement filled with locked boxes, a nursery with red handprints on the crib bars, a mirror that didn't reflect me. They didn't feel like dreams. They felt true. More vivid than my own life. Realer than my own name. Then everything fell away. The world became directionless. I was tumbling, spiraling through space that didn't obey logic or gravity. There was no up, no down, just motion, endless and consuming. Around me, that thing, the not Marcus, was everywhere. It filled the space, its laughter curling around me like smoke, not heard so much as felt, vibrating in a pitch that made my bones ache and my eyes tear up. Then the falling became something else. It became physical. Heavy. Crushing. My back struck something hard, and I snapped awake. Or I thought I did. My eyes opened to the hotel room. The same stifling darkness. The same peeling wallpaper. The orange haze of the parking lot lights leaking in through the window. Everything looked normal. But I couldn't move. Not a finger. Not my head. Not even my eyelids. I was trapped, locked inside my own body, my mind awake and screaming while my limbs ignored me. Panic bloomed fast and sharp. It was sleep paralysis, I told myself, a known phenomenon. Just a biological glitch. A misfire of REM cycles. But then I felt it. The dream hadn't ended. Something had come back with me. I felt it pressing down on my chest with the weight of a man, solid, suffocating. The mattress dipped beside me, a gentle yet unmistakable shift. Something was there, lying next to me. Then I smelled it. Cologne. Familiar. Cheap. The exact kind Marcus had worn since high school. It whispered in my ear. Did you miss me? The breath was icy, colder than the air conditioning. It brushed my cheek like frostbite, slicing through the warm panic pouring off my skin. I've been thinking about you, for so long. The voice was soft. Intimate. Wrong. I struggled with everything I had, summoning every drop of will to move. But nothing obeyed. My body was a coffin, and my mind clawed at the lid. Sweat trickled down my temples. My heart punched against my ribs like it was trying to break free on its own. Then I felt the fingers again. That same sensation from the dream, inhuman digits trailing along my bare arm, light but deliberate, tracing paths that turned my blood cold. The skin beneath them numbed and burned simultaneously. You know what you did, the voice said, closer now. I could hear the smile curling around the words. You know why I'm here. I didn't. Not really. My brain raced, flipping through memories in a desperate bid for explanation. Childhood scuffles. Fights. The screaming match at our mother's funeral. None of it could justify this. This was more than guilt. This was punishment. The fingers moved lower. My body wanted to recoil, but it remained frozen. My skin crawled as if 1,000 invisible insects were marching across it. I made a choice. Focus everything on one movement. One finger. One muscle. My left pinky. The one that had broken when Marcus and I had wrestled on the porch steps as kids. A fracture that never healed quite right. Maybe it still remembered how to resist. Move. I screamed it in my mind. Move, goddamn you. There, a twitch. Maybe real. Maybe not. But it was enough. A fracture in the paralysis. A crack in the shell. Sensation rushed back in a wave of needles. Pins. White-hot pain and glorious motion. I lurched upright in bed, gasping for air like a drowning man breaking the surface. The room was empty. No Marcus. No shape on the bed. No scent of cologne. Just the dry air of the hotel, and the mechanical whir of the AC under the window. The digital clock glowed, 3:33 a.m. Red numbers pulsing like a wound. I stumbled to my feet on trembling legs. Every shadow seemed too deep, too alive. I tore open the curtains. Nothing. I checked the closet. Empty. Looked under the bed like a scared child. Dust. Nothing more. But my body remembered. The touch still lingered. Like frostbite on the skin. Like memory on the soul. Sleep paralysis, I told myself again. But that didn't explain the pinky finger. It still tingled. As if something had held it back when the rest of me was being taken. I'd experienced sleep paralysis before, mostly during the more stressful chapters of my life. The mind wakes, but the body stays shackled in REM, caught in some evolutionary deadlock between dreaming and awareness. Hallucinations come with it, visions that feel so real, they can leave a person questioning reality for hours after. Dr. Peterson had explained it to me once, during a particularly bad stretch. He'd even given me techniques, grounding rituals, breathwork, visualization exercises. They'd helped. Usually. But this time, this had felt different. Heavier. More pointed. Not a misfire in the brain, but a visitation. I dressed quickly, hands trembling as I pulled on my jeans and tugged a sweater over my head. The hotel room pressed in on me like a sealed tomb. I needed air. Space. Anything to remind me that the world was still solid beneath my feet. The hallway outside was deserted, the kind of silence that hums in the ears. Only the cold red glow of emergency exit signs lit the way, casting long shadows that slithered as I moved. My footsteps echoed far too loudly in the emptiness, bouncing down the corridor with unnatural weight, as if someone else's steps followed a beat behind. The lobby was no better. Deserted except for a bored-looking night clerk flipping through a paperback novel behind the counter. A fan overhead spun slowly, groaning with each rotation. She looked up as I approached. Her expression shifted from disinterest to mild alarm. "You all right, hun?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to speak but had to clear my throat first. My voice came out rough, frayed. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "The room's stuffy." She nodded in sympathy. "These old buildings'll do that. Want me to check if we've got another room available?" I hesitated. The logical answer was yes. But instinct told me the problem wasn't room 1347. Whatever had happened, or was happening, wasn't tied to a room. It was following me. "No," I said. "Thanks. I think I'll just get some air." The automatic doors whooshed open, and I stepped into the October night. The contrast hit me immediately. The air was crisp, clean, real. The kind of cold that stung the lungs but grounded the mind. I walked across the parking lot until asphalt gave way to a narrow stretch of grass at the edge of the forest. The trees stood tall, black silhouettes against the deep navy of pre-dawn sky. Their branches swayed, but I felt no wind. Somewhere in the underbrush, something rustled. Probably a raccoon. Or a possum. But it didn't sound like foraging. It sounded like footsteps. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. A cold trickle ran down my spine. I pulled out my phone. Thought about calling Marcus. Demanding an explanation for the urgency in his voice when he'd called me 2 days ago, insisting we meet. But it was nearly 4 a.m. Whatever he had to say could wait for daylight. Couldn't it? The sound in the woods grew louder. More rhythmic. Like breathing. Or someone shifting their weight between branches. I stepped backward, toward the building. Then another step. The rustling followed, always keeping its distance, always just out of sight, but never leaving. Inside, the night clerk glanced up again. "Feel better?" "Yeah," I lied. "Much better." I pressed the elevator button. As I waited, I glanced toward the clerk. And caught her reflection in the elevator doors. She wasn't reading anymore. She was staring at me. Her head was tilted, just slightly, but at the same uncomfortable angle as the crooked numbers on my room door. Like she, too, had been adjusted. Bent. The elevator dinged softly. I stepped inside without looking back. But just before the doors closed, I glimpsed her face in the distorted reflection again, and for a split second, it blurred. Not dramatically. Just enough to leave me with a pang of nausea and the terrible, inescapable sense of recognition. Back in room 1347, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to piece myself back together. Yes, sleep paralysis could explain the nightmare. That part, at least, had precedent. But the sounds in the woods, the look on the clerk's face, the warped reflection, no. Those things were outside of me, independent of my thoughts. Was I having a breakdown? It would make sense. The divorce, the months of solitude, the anxiety of seeing Marcus again, after everything left unsaid. Maybe it had finally boiled over. But then there was that call, that unmistakable fear in his voice. Marcus hadn't sounded like a man reconnecting with his estranged brother. He'd sounded like someone who was running out of time. The minutes crawled by. I tried to watch television to distract myself, but every channel was static or worse, off-kilter programs I couldn't comprehend. Talk shows where the guests spoke in languages that didn't exist. Documentaries about cities I'd never heard of with maps that made no geographical sense. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it again. That touch. Those fingers, still pressing where they didn't belong. Not pain exactly, more like a kind of wrongness that soaked through skin and bone and memory. I rubbed my arm compulsively. It did nothing. I waited for dawn like a prisoner waiting for a guard shift to change. And when the first hints of grey began to bleed through the curtains, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Daylight made it weaker, like it couldn't quite hold its shape in the sun. I showered. The water ran rust-colored for the first few minutes, then cleared. I didn't question it. Just another fault in the plumbing of this old place, or so I told myself. Cleaned and dressed, I packed my bag and checked out. The diner Marcus had picked was only a few miles down the road. A stereotypical roadside place, metal siding, chipped neon, and a flickering sign that read, "Eat the tea" blinked slowly, like a dying heart. I arrived early and claimed a booth by the window, where I could keep an eye on the parking lot. Watch for his arrival. The waitress came over after a minute. She looked to be in her 60s, with grey hair tied into a tight bun and hands that shook slightly as she poured my coffee. "You're not from around here," she said. Her voice had a faint accent I couldn't quite place. "Just passing through," I replied. "Meeting my brother." She paused mid-pour, coffee sloshing near the rim of my cup. "Brother, you say?" "Yeah. Marcus. Marcus Chen." Her face drained of color. The coffee pot slammed onto the table, hard enough to make a few patrons look over. Her eyes were wide now, and what she said next made my blood run cold. She said it quietly, like someone telling a ghost story she half believed herself. "There ain't nobody by that name been through here in years, not since." She stopped herself, glancing around the diner as though expecting someone or something to overhear. Her gaze lingered at the fogged windows, the rain-tapped glass, before returning to me. "Not since the accident. Up at the old Grand View. Must be going on 3 years now." The air around me turned cold despite the heat of my coffee. I felt it pool in my stomach like swallowed ice. "What accident?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. She hesitated, then leaned in, voice a whisper pressed between us. "Young man, about your age. Checked into room 1347. Never checked out. They found him in the woods behind the hotel. Said it looked like he'd been running from something. Collapsed mid-stride. Coroner called it a heart attack, but he was too young. Too healthy. Just didn't add up." I didn't feel the ceramic slip from my fingers until the crash brought the whole diner's attention to our table. My coffee cup shattered against the tabletop, scalding liquid spilling across my jeans and onto the floor. I didn't flinch. I could barely feel it. "What did he look like?" I asked, voice hoarse. The waitress frowned, thinking. "Asian fellow. About 6 feet, maybe a little taller. Kinda quiet. Eyes older than his face, you know? Polite, real polite, but he made people uneasy. Said he was waiting for his brother." My mouth went dry. The diner spun around me, the world tilting like a carnival ride gone wrong. I stumbled out of the booth, dropped a fistful of crumpled bills onto the table without counting them, and burst into the grey morning. Outside, the rain had slowed to a cold drizzle. The wind cut through my coat as I staggered toward the rusted payphone near the diner entrance. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a warning, but I punched in Marcus's number with trembling fingers. Voicemail. The same message I'd heard 2 days ago. "Hi, you've reached Marcus. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you." His voice hadn't changed. Warm. Familiar. Alive. But according to the waitress, Marcus had died 3 years ago. Found in the woods behind the same hotel I'd just spent the night in. The same room. 1347. I don't remember the drive back to the Grand View. Only the sound of the rain hammering the windshield and the numb pressure of my fingers locked around the steering wheel, knuckles white and aching. My heartbeat sounded distant, muffled like it was coming from the wrong side of a wall. The day clerk at the front desk, a young man with a lazy eye and a bored expression, barely glanced up when I demanded answers. "Yeah. Marcus Chen, he said, after a moment of searching the name in his computer. Died up here 3 years ago. October 15th, room 1347. We closed that room for a while after, bad for business. But eventually the manager reopened it. Had to. Bills don't pay themselves. He looked at me, then added, funny thing, though. We still get calls sometimes. People asking to speak with Marcus. Claim he called them. Always around this time of year. Must be something about the date. October 15th. Today. I didn't go back to the room. I didn't want to see what might be waiting for me. I checked out, forcing myself to move with calm I didn't feel, loaded my bag into the trunk of my car. But just as I was about to close the door, I looked up. 13th floor. Room 1347. A figure stood in the window. Still. Watching. Its shape distorted by glass and distance, but unmistakably there. The outline of a man. And though I couldn't see his face, I felt his gaze. Patient. Hungry. Story 4. Expanded the man in the rain. The first thing you learn in this business is that people don't just buy jewelry. They buy meaning. Hope. Protection. Something to hold on to when the world begins to shift beneath their feet. I've owned a religious artifacts shop for 12 years. Crosses, amulets, saints in pewter and bronze. I've seen all kinds come through my door, grieving widows, desperate lovers, the kind of men who mutter prayers with calloused hands and eyes full of quiet fear. But nothing prepared me for him. It had been raining for hours. The kind of slow, steady downpour that muffles sound and drapes the city in a soggy veil. The jazz station in the corner crackled softly, playing something melancholy on saxophone. I was alone. Then he was there. Not walked in. Appeared. One moment the door was closed, the next he was standing in front of my counter like he had stepped through the space between seconds. His coat was dark and expensive looking, tailored to his unnaturally long frame. I waited for the telltale drip of rainwater, the wet squeak of boots on tile. There was none. The floor beneath him was bone dry. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and thin in a way that didn't look unhealthy so much as engineered. Like someone had measured and sculpted him for precision, not comfort. His face was long and sharp, his eyes dark hollows under the shop's fluorescence. But it was his hands that stayed with me. Pale. Smooth. And just slightly off. The fingers too long. The joints too few. I swallowed, forcing my best salesman's smile. Evening. Hell of a storm out there. What can I help you find? He didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the display cases with surgical attention. The crucifixes, rosaries, relics blessed by clergy, prayed over, protected all seemed to dim under his gaze, as though the sacred metal itself recoiled. Then he spoke. You wear a cross. His voice was refined, precise. European, maybe, but dulled and reshaped by years of practice. Like a musician playing an unfamiliar instrument flawlessly. May I ask what it means to you? My hand moved instinctively to the crucifix around my neck. Silver. Worn thin with time. A gift from my grandmother when I turned 18. I hadn't taken it off in 15 years, not for weddings, not for breakups, not for long, sleepless nights in the back office. It's personal, I managed. Sentimental. Sentiment is powerful, he said softly. It has weight. Echoes. The kind that linger long after the original source is gone. He reached into his coat too quickly, too fluidly, and placed a small box on the counter. Black wood. No hinges. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside was a medallion I had only seen in books, ancient books kept behind locked glass. Not Roman. Not Christian. Older. Protection, he said. But not for you. I looked up sharply. Who is it for, then? He smiled. And for just a moment, the lights flickered. You'll know, when it's time. He turned and walked out, the bell above the door remaining silent. I rushed to the window, but there was no sign of him. Only the street empty and glistening under the storm. I returned to the counter. The box still sat there. Heavy. Waiting. His voice came not from his lips, but from the air itself, a resonance that slipped through the floorboards, slithered across the walls, and coiled inside my ears. "You always were the weak one." I tried to respond, to ask what he meant, what he wanted, but my throat had sealed itself shut. Not from fear, not exactly, but from some deeper paralysis, like language itself had fled me. He stepped forward. Each footfall was impossibly loud, booming through the hallway like thunder cracking inside bone. And with every step he took, the corridor narrowed. The walls didn't move so much as tightened, pressing inward like a throat in the middle of a swallow. I felt them closing in, brushing my shoulders, squeezing breath from my lungs. I wanted to run. I couldn't. I could barely think. Only listen, as his footsteps brought the world crashing inward. Back in the shop, that same voice returned, but this time wrapped in charm, polished like obsidian. I tried to maintain the pretense of calm, but something in his tone pulled at my chest like a hook behind the sternum. "It belonged to my grandmother," I said, without fully realizing I was speaking. "She always said, it would protect me from things that hunt in the dark." His lips curved, not a smile of comfort, but a kind of pleased curiosity. The way a collector might regard a rare specimen. "May I see it?" Every rational instinct screamed against it. But my hands moved as if caught in a tide, lifting the chain from my neck, the crucifix trembling between my fingers. It felt heavier than usual. Not just the weight of silver, but memory, history, bloodline. I extended it toward him. He reached out. When his fingers brushed mine, it was like plunging my hand into a still lake in winter. Not cool, cold. The kind of cold that consumes, that remembers ancient things. His touch lingered just a moment too long, and I felt something in me recoil. Not out of modesty or discomfort, but recognition. On some primal, animal level, my body knew this was wrong. He held the cross to the light, turning it slowly. The silver caught the fluorescence and cast tiny refractions across his face, little bursts of shimmering light that danced across features I hadn't noticed before. The unnatural symmetry of his cheekbones. The way his eyes absorbed light rather than reflected it. "Exquisite craftsmanship," he murmured. "The weight of faith is always heavier than the metal that bears it. Don't you think?" Before I could respond, he reached for my right hand. His grip was gentle, but inescapable. A deceptive kindness in it, like silk over wire. And then, the cold returned, creeping up my wrist like frost across a window pane. I tried to pull away. Couldn't. His eyes met mine, and I froze. "You work with sacred things," he said softly. "You handle belief like currency. But you doubt." His thumb traced my knuckles, slow and deliberate. "I can feel it in your pulse. In the tremor of your hands. When did the weight of their faith become heavier than your own?" The question hit with startling precision. How many times had I reassured a grieving customer? Promised hope I no longer carried myself? How often had I sold crosses, saints, talismans with nothing in my chest but dust and professional detachment? Too long, something inside me whispered. Then he did something I didn't expect. He raised my hand to his face, and ran his tongue slowly along my index finger. The sensation was jolting. Not painful. Intimate. Too intimate. His tongue was the only warm part of him, and it moved with the slow, unsettling precision of a creature savoring more than flesh. "So much doubt," he whispered, licking the next finger. "So much accumulated skepticism. It coats your hands like dust. Seeps into your fingerprints. Makes you heavy with unbelief." I should have pulled away. But some deeper, dormant part of me, the part that had been quietly dying inside for years, was rousing. And it listened. He continued the ritual with quiet reverence, each flick of his tongue awakening nerves I had long stopped noticing. "I can wash it away," he said. "All the years of hollow rituals, faith you mimic but do not feel. Let me cleanse you, until your soul shines like the silver you wear." When he finished with my right hand, he held out his own. "The other," he said. And I gave it to him. The shop around us fell utterly still. The rain softened, like it had moved somewhere far away. The jazz in the corner speaker became a low, warbled hum, like the memory of music rather than the sound itself. As he leaned over my left hand, I glanced at the front window, now dark with stormlight, and caught our reflection. There I was, rigid behind the counter, pale, strained, my grip on the edge so tight my fingers had gone white. And there he was. But his reflection wasn't right. Everything else mirrored perfectly: his expensive coat, his posture, the careful way his hair fell across his forehead. But his tongue, the warm, wet organ that still traced circles across my palm, cast no shadow. Not in the mirror. Not anywhere. I tore my hand away. Stumbled back. "What are you?" I gasped. He straightened, slowly. His expression remained calm, but something darker had entered his eyes. "Hunger. You see it now," he said. "The absence where reflection should be. The cold that follows my touch. The way the sacred dims in my presence." I backed against the wall, clutching my grandmother's cross so tightly that its edges cut into my palm. "I am what remains when faith dies." His voice changed with those words, deeper, layered, like more than one voice was speaking through him. "I feed on doubt. On the emptiness you've so carefully cultivated. You think you were protecting yourself, building armor of skepticism. But all you did was hollow yourself out enough for me to enter." The shop changed. The warm, golden lights faded to a bleak, grey-blue pallor. Shadows elongated, stretching across the walls like cracks in reality itself. They moved independently of the light sources, bending toward him, adoring. The jazz became warped, dissonant horns bending in unnatural pitches that clawed at the edges of my sanity. "But you still wear the cross," he said, eyes narrowing. "Still clutch it in fear. That tells me something." He began to circle the counter. Graceful. Predatory. "There is still an ember in you. A spark beneath the ash. That flicker of belief is why I'm here." With every step he took, the temperature plummeted. I could see my breath now, clouds of mist rising like prayers. "You're not lost yet," he said. "But you want to be. You've grown tired of holding on. Haven't you?" His voice surrounded me, coiled in my ears, slipped behind my ribs. "Let go. Let me take the weight. Let me fill what the world has emptied." He stopped inches from me. His hand rose, fingers outstretched, expectant. "Say yes." And for one terrible, electric moment, I merely did. He stood close enough now that I could see my reflection in his eyes, two deep, dark pools that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. I saw myself there, smaller somehow, distant, like a memory caught in glass. And he smiled, not with amusement but with understanding. "The question," he said, his voice low and impossibly close, "is whether that ember still buried in your chest, whether it's strong enough to burn away what I've already planted in you. Whether your grandmother's faith, carried in silver and sentiment, can outshine the hunger I've stirred awake." I pressed the cross tighter to my chest, trying to remember what comfort had once radiated from its cold metal. But his words throbbed inside my head like a second heartbeat. Years of doubt, of silence masquerading as peace, echoed louder than the whispered hymns of my childhood. How long had it been since this cross felt like more than ornament? When had the sanctuary of this shop become nothing more than a place to barter hollow hope? "You can't," I said, though whether I was denying his power or my own slow decay, I didn't know. "This place is blessed. These objects are holy. It's supposed to be safe." He tilted his head slightly, almost sympathetically, as if I'd just said something tragically naive. "Blessed by whom?" he asked. "By priests whose names you barely remember? By a God you question in every silent hour of the night? Blessings are not permanent fixtures. They require tending. They require faith. And you've been starving both for far longer than you'd care to admit." His words found their mark. When had I last felt the tingle of something divine during Father Martinez's blessings? When had the sacred stopped feeling sacred and become inventory? This shop, once a cradle of peace, now felt like a carefully curated illusion, quiet shelves lined with faith packaged and priced. But even as my thoughts swirled in that cold void, something instinctual stirred. Muscle memory. My fingers found the smoothed groove worn into the back of the cross, where my grandmother's thumb had pressed again and again during her whispered prayers. And suddenly, I could hear her voice. Not clearly, more like the memory of a lullaby sung behind a closed door. But it was there, reminding me that faith didn't always arrive with certainty. That sometimes, trust was stronger than understanding. My grandmother believed, I said aloud. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded steadier. She gave this to me not because I had earned it, but because she knew someday I'd need it. Even if I couldn't believe in anything else. His face shifted, not fear, exactly. But something wavered. A flicker of uncertainty. Borrowed faith, he murmured. It breaks easily. Maybe, I said. But maybe it spreads too. Maybe memory is enough. Maybe a thumb-worn cross passed through generations carries something real, something even doubt can't fully erase. The lights above us flickered violently. Shadows twitched and scattered like insects startled by sudden brightness. For just a moment, I glanced at the window behind him and his reflection wavered. Thinned. Became less certain. The cold that had sunk into the shop's bones paused. You still doubt, he said, though the conviction in his voice was cracking. I can taste it in your skin. Feel it in your hands. Years of silence. Prayer like words shouted into wind. How can faith that isn't even yours, stand against that? I closed my eyes. The cross felt warm now. Or maybe I was just imagining it. But I didn't let go. I leaned into the sensation, real or not, and built something on it. Something fragile but stubborn. Maybe doubt isn't the enemy, I whispered. I opened my eyes. Maybe it's just faith that's scared. Afraid of being let down again. Maybe the weight isn't supposed to go away. Maybe it's meant to be carried. He stood there, still in that expensive coat, still all angles and shadows and wrongness. But something between us had changed. The air didn't feel as suffocating. The shop felt less like a cage and more like space. The jazz, warped into noise for so long, resolved slowly into the curve of a melody I recognized. Something soft. Something human. This isn't over, he said, already backing toward the door. But the threat lacked sharpness now. He was losing something. Doubt is patient. It waits. It grows. It feeds on every unanswered prayer, every quiet moment when that thing around your neck feels like nothing more than shaped metal. He paused at the threshold. Rain was dripping from the hem of his coat, pooling at his feet. The next time you sell someone hope you don't believe in. His voice softened to a whisper. Remember this moment. Remember how close you came to understanding what you really are. Then he was gone. The bell above the door didn't ring. Only the soft patter of rain against glass remained. I stood there for what felt like hours, the cross clutched in a trembling hand. My mind searched for reason, for logic. Hallucination. Stress. Loneliness. Gas leak. And then I saw it. 2 damp handprints on the counter where he had leaned forward to touch me. But in the center of each, the wood was blackened, scorched. Not wet. Burned. I looked down at my own hands. No marks. No burns. But as I raised them to the light, I saw something, just the faintest shimmer. Like heat rising off asphalt. Like something old being remembered by the skin. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the shop, surrounded by thousands of symbols, crosses and medals and scriptures, I was no longer certain what I believed. But the cross around my neck felt different. Not heavier, but more present. As if it were no longer only a symbol of belief, but a reminder of how close belief and doubt can lie in the same breath. And in the darkest corners of the shop, I felt it again, something unseen. Watching. Waiting. Waiting for the next time doubt outweighed trust. For the ember to finally go dark. The first time I noticed the scent, I assumed Sarah had changed her perfume. It was floral, overpoweringly so, sweet and cloying, the kind that lingered in the room long after she'd gone. It seemed to cling to the fabric of the bedding, to soak into the corners of our bedroom like moisture into old wood. It felt invasive in a way that perfume shouldn't. That evening, I brought it up casually over dinner, expecting a simple explanation. Instead, Sarah gave me that look, the one I'd come to recognize as both concern and caution. A quiet assessment. The same expression she'd worn last winter during what we had gently agreed to call my episodes. I haven't worn perfume in months, David. You know that. It gives me headaches. Her tone was soft, measured, kind, but clinical. I let it go, pretending her words had reassured me, though they hadn't. Maybe it was stress. The new job had me working 12-hour days, stuck in client meetings that blurred together into a haze of numbers and empty coffee cups. Coming home to an empty house didn't help. Sarah's nursing shifts often meant we passed each other like ghosts, footsteps fading before we ever crossed paths. Ships passing in the night, as my father would say during his increasingly frequent visits. Since Mom died, Dad had started stopping by more often, sometimes unannounced. At 73, he insisted he just wanted the company. I suspected he was watching me, keeping tabs. Ever since the breakdown 6 months ago, I could see the question in his eyes, the unspoken worry. Is he slipping again? They were all thinking it. Hell, even I was. Then, the scent came back. Stronger. Pungent. The floral sweetness now undercut with something sour and dense, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I came home early, client meeting cancelled at the last minute. The house felt wrong. Not disturbed, exactly, but recently used. Like the echo of presence still vibrated in the air. That subtle atmospheric shift, the way stillness settles after motion. In the bedroom, something caught my eye just beside Sarah's pillow. A tissue. Crumpled, used, and stained with a smudge of lipstick. My breath caught in my throat. It was damp, still faintly wet with either tears or sweat, I couldn't tell. But the lipstick, it was the wrong color. Deep crimson, almost burgundy, like dried blood. Sarah always wore neutrals, soft pinks. Never this. I lifted the tissue to the light filtering through the blinds. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam, indifferent. I inhaled. That scent again. Floral. Thick. Cloying. Funereal. When Sarah got home that night, I confronted her gently, afraid of what the answer might be, and more afraid of what it might mean if there wasn't one. She looked at me, genuinely confused. I haven't been home since this morning, she said, frowning. Are you sure you didn't? I saw the moment she adjusted. Saw her tread the line between sympathy and suspicion. Maybe it came in on your clothes. From work. You know smells cling. Or maybe, it got stuck in your briefcase. Her tone was careful, deliberate. The way someone speaks to a frightened animal. She was trying not to spook me, which only made it worse. The visits began after that. Signs. Traces subtle but unmistakable. A kitchen chair slightly pulled out from the table. Curtains closed when I was certain they'd been open that morning. The television remote moved from one end of the coffee table to the other. Small things. But personal. Intimate. Worst of all was the bathroom. I came home once to find the air still thick with steam. The shower walls damp. The mirror fogged. It hadn't been hours since someone used it. It had been minutes. I ran my finger across the condensation on the mirror. Moisture clung to my skin. And that smell, faint, but present. Perfume. And beneath it, something else. Earthy. Wet soil. Like the scent of freshly turned grave dirt after rain. I started keeping a journal. Writing it all down. Times. Dates. Locations. A sanity ledger. Proof that I wasn't imagining this. I needed something solid to anchor myself against the creeping doubt. 3:47 p.m. Tuesday, wet towel in the hamper. Sarah on double shift. 2:15 p.m. Thursday, kitchen window open. I never use that window. 4:02 p.m. Saturday, bed sheets rumpled on Sarah's side. She left for work at 6 a.m. There was a pattern forming. Someone was in our home, but only when both of us were away. Someone was staying long enough to leave evidence. Not just signs of passing through, but occupancy. Like they lived here. Like they belonged. It wasn't random. It felt personal. When I finally told my father, he laughed. We were sitting on his back porch, watching the sun sink low and spill amber across the lawn. He handed me a beer and gave me the same amused look he'd worn when I was a kid, afraid of monsters under the bed. "Someone's just coming to visit his father-in-law," he said with a chuckle. "Maybe Sarah's got family you don't know about." There was something about the way he said it. The too casual tone. A current of implication beneath the humor, as if he knew more than he was letting on. When I pressed him, he shrugged and started talking about the weather. That night, I installed a camera. A small, discreet device hidden behind a photo frame on the dresser. It uploaded directly to my phone, motion activated. If someone was coming in, I'd see them. I'd have proof. 4 days, the footage showed nothing but an empty room. Shadows shifting with the light. Curtains rustling with the wind. Then, on Thursday, everything changed. Timestamp, 2:34 p.m. The bedroom door opened, and someone stepped into frame. The room looked ordinary in the light. No sign of intrusion. No strange scent. But then I saw it. On the nightstand. A single photograph. Glossy. Still curled from the heat of whatever cheap printer had spat it out. It hadn't been there the night before. I was certain. In the image, Sarah and I were asleep last night, judging by the angle of the light through the curtains, the pattern of the blankets, the position of her arms slung gently across my chest. But what made my breath catch in my throat was the figure in the corner. Barely visible in the background. Standing at the edge of the frame, near the closet. Watching. The face was blurry, but the shape, the posture, it was unmistakable. My father. Or something wearing his shape. I didn't show Sarah the photo. I couldn't. Not yet. I slipped it into the back of my drawer and told myself I needed time to think. Time to process. That day at work, I barely heard a word anyone said. The world felt distant, like I was watching it from the wrong end of a tunnel. Colors were too sharp. Sound was too soft. Everyone's voices echoed just a beat too late. By the time I got home, it was raining. The kind of summer storm that came down in sheets, warm and angry. Inside, the lights were off. The house was dim, shadows stretched long and uncertain. I called Sarah's name, but there was no answer. Her car wasn't in the driveway. The air smelled again, sweet and thick. Like perfume. Like funeral flowers left to rot. I moved through the house slowly, every creak underfoot sounding like a scream. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The bulbs overhead flickered, humming with strained electricity. When I reached the bedroom, I saw the closet door was ajar. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. But it had been shut that morning. I was sure of it. Something rustled inside. A whisper of movement. Not loud, but deliberate. I picked up the bat from beside the bed again. My fingers tightened around it. I stepped toward the closet. The air grew colder the closer I got, as though the space behind that door didn't quite belong to the same world. I reached out. Pushed the door open. Inside, it was dark, deeper than the rest of the house, as if the shadows had pooled there and refused to leave. My eyes adjusted slowly. At first, I saw nothing but hanging coats, storage boxes, silence. Then, I saw the hand. Just visible beneath the coats. A pale shape, curled and motionless. I reached out and pulled the coats aside. There was nothing there. No hand. No body. Just empty floor and a faint scent of soil. I stepped back, heart pounding. And that's when I heard the whisper. Close. Right behind me. Just one word. Soft. Familiar. David. I turned, swinging the bat blindly, but there was no one there. Just the echo of my own breathing, too fast, too shallow. The perfume was gone. The house was still. Too still. Like it was listening. He moved like he belonged there, like the space remembered him. Tall, dressed in dark clothing, he moved through our bedroom with the ease of someone who had lived in it for years. I watched him from the camera feed in frozen silence, unable to look away. His face never turned toward the lens. But something in the shape of him, his posture, the tilt of his head as he glanced around, felt familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. The footage ended with the figure stepping out of frame. I rewound it 3 times. Each time, I watched him emerge, walk slowly past the foot of the bed, linger by the window, then disappear again. That night, I searched the room for any signs he had left behind. And I found it. A single photograph had been placed on my nightstand. I was certain, absolutely certain, it hadn't been there the night before. It showed Sarah and me, asleep in our bed. The perspective was impossibly close, taken from only a few feet away. The blankets, the position of Sarah's arm, the way my mouth had slightly parted in sleep. It was unmistakably from the night before. And in the bottom corner of the print, a tiny digital timestamp, 3:17 a.m. The exact time I'd awakened in a cold sweat, convinced someone had been standing in the doorway. I slipped the photograph into my notebook, the same notebook I'd used to catalogue all the strange occurrences. But as I held it up to the morning light, something in the image made my breath catch. Reflected in the glossy curve of Sarah's bedside lamp, caught just in the edge of the camera's flash, was a face. My face. Staring directly at the camera. Expressionless. Empty. The eyes like two dull mirrors. It wasn't just that I recognized myself, it was how I looked in that frozen moment. Predatory. Alien. Like a mask stretched over something that didn't know how to be human. I haven't told Sarah about the photo. Haven't told anyone. Because if I'm the one taking these pictures, if I'm the one moving through the house during the hours I can't remember, leaving tissues, traces of perfume, and muddy footprints by the door, then the question is no longer who is haunting us. It's what am I becoming? There are hours, gaps in my memory, when time seems to bend, dissolve. Periods when I feel like I've come back from somewhere I can't name. I'll blink and find myself in a different room. I'll find dirt beneath my fingernails, a scratch on my arm, a knot in my shoelaces I don't remember tying. Dad still visits. Still makes jokes about coming to check in on his favorite son-in-law. But there's something different in his eyes now. A softness that doesn't feel comforting. More like recognition. Like he knows what's happening to me. And worse, like he's been waiting for it. The perfume is stronger now. Not just in the air. I smell it on myself, on my hands, on my collar, even on my breath. Sometimes, I catch my own reflection in the mirror and there's a flicker, just a moment, when the man looking back isn't me. Not exactly. He wears my face, yes. But his posture is wrong. His eyes hold knowledge I never learned. Tonight, Sarah's working another double. The house will be empty. Plenty of time for visits. Plenty of time for photographs. For whatever else has been happening here. I should go. Pack a bag. Drive to a hotel. Stay somewhere safe until I can understand what's wrong with me. But I know I won't. Something is keeping me here. Something stronger than fear, stronger than logic. Tonight, I'm going to wait. And I'm going to see who walks through that door. And whether it will still be me. The dashboard clock glowed in the dark like an eye that wouldn't blink. 3:17 a.m. The exact same time. Again. My sedan sliced through the drenched highway, tires whispering over rain-slicked pavement. The world outside was a shapeless blur, fog and shadow smeared across my windshield. Coffee had long since given up its hold on my body. All that kept me alert were the windshield wipers ticking like a metronome and the occasional jolt of cold sweat on the back of my neck. The radio was dead. Just static. Every station. White noise filled the car like a heavy gas, crowding my thoughts. And then I saw him. A figure stepped directly into the road, materializing in the sweep of my headlights. Too close. Too fast. I slammed on the brakes, instinct faster than thought. The car bucked beneath me, ABS chattering as tires gripped wet asphalt. My seatbelt snapped tight, pinning me to the seat. I braced for impact, flesh, bone, windshield shatter. But there was nothing. No thud. No scream. He just kept walking. Dark. Too dark. Not just in skin or shadow, but in the way he absorbed light, like a silhouette carved out of the world. Even with my high beams directly on him, I couldn't make out features. Just a void. A man-shaped hole in reality. And then I noticed, he wasn't walking at all. He was gliding. Smoothly. Effortlessly. A few inches above the road. He left no reflection in the puddles. No disturbance. Not even a splash. I couldn't breathe. My fingers had gone white around the steering wheel. The car's engine idled roughly, as though it too was holding its breath. He reached the chain-link fence at the roadside 8 feet tall, crowned with loops of razor wire. A steel barrier no living person could pass. But he didn't climb. He passed through. Like vapor. The fence shivered. A low metallic hum spread outward, like a tuning fork against stone. I felt it in my ribs. In my teeth. Then he was gone. Just the quivering fence left behind, trembling in the rain. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. The hazard lights pulsed around me, turning the highway into a flickering tunnel. Rain hammered the roof like impatient fingers. When a semi-truck's horn blared behind me, I finally moved. Just enough to lift my foot off the brake and drift forward. My hands were trembling so badly I had to use both to hold the wheel. The highway ahead was empty again. But I knew I'd seen something real. He moved like he belonged there. Tall, dressed in dark clothing, he navigated the bedroom with unsettling familiarity, passing the bed where Sarah and I lay asleep calmly, deliberately, as if it were his home and we were the guests. The footage ended. I rewound it 3 times, each time hoping I had imagined it. But there he was, pacing slowly past the bed, pausing near the window, then vanishing out of frame. No hesitation. No sign of fear. That morning, I found something on my nightstand I was certain hadn't been there the night before, a single printed photograph. It showed Sarah and me asleep, just like in the footage. The angle was close, too close, taken from a few feet away, like the photographer had been standing right beside the bed. Every detail was clear, the crumpled blankets, the faint crease in Sarah's brow, the slack parting of my lips. In the bottom corner, a timestamp. The same time I'd woken up in a panic, convinced someone had been standing in the doorway. Sarah didn't see it. She was already gone for work. I slipped the photo into my notebook, the one where I'd been collecting all the strange things, the tissues, the scent, the photos, the smudges on the mirror. But when I held the picture up to the window's morning light, I saw something that made my hands shake. Reflected in the curve of Sarah's bedside lamp, caught in the camera's flash, was a face. My face. Expressionless. Pale. Eyes dull and hollow like glass marbles. It wasn't just that I was there, it was how I looked. Like a predator mid-stalk. Like something wearing my skin. I haven't told Sarah. I haven't told anyone. Because if I'm the one taking these photographs, if I'm the one wandering the house during the hours I can't remember, then the question isn't who's haunting us. It's what am I becoming? There are gaps, moments that vanish without explanation. I'll find myself in different rooms with no memory of how I got there. Scratches on my arm. Perfume on my collar. Mud on the bathroom tile. Always after midnight. Always alone. My father-in-law still drops by. Still tells his tired jokes. But there's something in his expression now, a flicker behind the eyes. Not concern. Recognition. Or maybe approval. Like he knows. Like he's been waiting for this. The perfume is stronger now. I smell it on my skin. My clothes. Even my breath. And when I pass mirrors, sometimes I catch movement that doesn't quite line up. My reflection tilting its head a second too late. Smiling when I haven't moved my face. Sarah's working another double tonight. The house will be empty. Quiet. Vulnerable. Just like it was the last few times. I should leave. Go to a hotel. Lock myself away somewhere safe. But I won't. Something is holding me here. Something deeper than fear. Something inside me. Tonight, I'm staying. To see who comes home. And whether it's still me. Story 6, Call. The road stretched ahead like an artery through a sleeping world. Rain whispered against the windshield, soft and steady. My car sliced through the darkness, wipers ticking back and forth with the precision of a metronome. I was beyond tired, caffeine dead in my veins, fingers numb around the wheel. The radio sputtered static. Every station. A low hiss of white noise that seemed to fill the cabin like fog. Then I saw him. A figure stepped into the headlights. Close. Too close. I slammed on the brakes. Tires screeched against wet pavement. The seatbelt dug into my chest, momentum hurling me forward. I braced for impact. But nothing came. He was just there, walking calmly across the road. Not even looking at the car. I say walking, but it wasn't that. His feet didn't touch the ground. He floated just inches above it, gliding smoothly like a puppet with its strings pulled by some invisible force. He wasn't just dark. He consumed light. The high beams seemed to vanish into him, outlining a silhouette that didn't reflect or cast shadows. A man-shaped void. He passed through the chain-link fence on the far side of the road. No effort. No sound. Just through. The metal shivered, rattling with a strange hum I felt in my bones. Like a tuning fork striking something deep inside my ribcage. A cold frequency that didn't quite belong in the world. Then he was gone. The fence trembled. The road behind me was empty. My car idled, hazard lights blinking red in the darkness like a heartbeat. I sat there for a long time. Maybe minutes. Maybe more. It was only when a semi roared past, horn blaring, that I snapped out of it. I drove home with both hands clenched on the wheel. Rain falling harder now. Wipers fighting to keep up. But nothing felt real anymore.